Okay, yeah, 13. This video is around attribution theory. I'm also going to touch on a little bit of arousal stuff as well ahead of Friday's lesson. Friday's lesson, I have got an attribution question for you and an arousal question for you, just in line with what I've been doing with you over the last few lessons, recapping some of Miss Jagger's stuff and giving that an exam focus. Your arousal question on Friday, there's no mention of any specific theories in this video. What I will say to you is that you must be fully aware of those theories and how somatic and cognitive arousal impact on performance. Okay, you've got all the notes on that. I've spent 2 lessons on that with you as well. There shouldn't be anything you need. If there is, come and see me before Friday, but we're really thinking about somatic and cognitive arousal and how those things impact on performance. Alright, on to attribution then, and we really seem to just this sort of click at the end of the lesson that we sort of started to get this and understand it, and I've got quite a tough question for you on Friday about this. So, you have seen this diagram here, and I know some of the issue we had earlier was because we were thinking about these words, yeah? We need to be thinking about these words here. The stability and locus of causality. Locus meaning place, causality, the cause, alright? Where is the place that we can put the blame? How stable is that blame? And these are the examples of this, and we should know that now, so that internal factors are under our control. Yeah, we control these internal factors. Now, an internal factor can be unstable, means it's changeable, i.e. here we've got effort. Internal unstable factor, effort, in that I control how hard I try, but that is changeable. An internal stable factor is ability, so that doesn't change. Okay, it can change over time through training and practice and such like, but in a game situation, realistically, my ability level doesn't change. We've also got external factors. These are things that you don't control, the performer does not control, i.e. the task difficulties. That's playing against someone who's really difficult, or an unstable factor. So that's stable, the task difficulty, that's in the game, we don't change that. Luck is an unstable factor, that changes. We can imply there like weather conditions, referee decisions, etc., that kind of thing. We seem to be fairly happy with that by the end of the lesson. Thinking about that, I just want you look at this, the title of this video, and I just want you to watch this clip with Steve Bruce, who at the time I think he was manager of Hull or whichever club it was, and listen to the things he says. Now listen to the things he says with your sports psychology heads on, alright? So you are listening to this as a psychologist. He says no excuses, but I want you to listen to the things he says. Why is he saying those things?
Steve, a pretty bad day all round, I would guess, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no excuses. I mean, at the end of the day, there was nothing in it really. First half, I thought, if anything, we might have edged it to get a deflected goal, which sent us backwards. But second half, we simply were not good enough in all areas of the pitch, and we can't really make any more excuses than that. I could come out here and try, but the second half in particular, we found it really, really tough. And in that performance, you're really missing your big players. And today, we've had too many of our big players. When you need games like today to rely on, unfortunately, they weren't available.
It looked to me like a side that's lost some confidence.
Yeah, of course. Well, when you're in the run that you're in, and this Barclays Premier League is unforgiving, I keep saying that. And the one thing you have to be able to do is when you're in a horrible situation or a horrible run, is to find a bit of form and something to break from you. But this afternoon, the more we tried, the worse we got, and unfortunately, we didn't, take the ball and do all the stuff that you need to do. And you're right, confidence is a huge thing in football. When people are confident, and it needs a result, it needs a victory, it needs, But the one thing we have to do is stay with it and see it through, because there's still a long way to go, and hopefully we'll get some people back fit and free from suspension. And I'm still convinced we'll be okay, but we've got to be honest with each other, and we've got to produce better than what we did today in all areas of the pitch.
Was there a shout for a penalty very, very late on?
Possibly, but to be fair, the way I've seen it was it was a fair decision from the referee. It would have been a soft one if we had got it.
Okay, so I've moved away from Steve Bruce there. You'll think about all of those different things he talked about injuries, he talked about deflected goal. He then also said about them trying hard but not just not happening for them. You know, the more they tried, the worse they got. He did say that they didn't deserve that penalty. So there was a real combination of things that he was discussing there that give a real insight into why he said certain things, and hopefully you've been able to work that out. I'm not going to give you all those answers because we can discuss that in the lesson. Right, have a look at this slide that's on the screen, and these are the kind of characteristics of a high achiever and a low achiever, and you could relate this to achievement motivation absolutely as well. Yeah, so these are motivated to achieve success. We've got this less motivation to achieve success here, avoid failure. And not trying to avoid failure, or not being bothered about trying to avoid failure. Look at the key points about where they attribute things. So success is to stable, internal, controllable factors. Over here in our low achiever, we've got successes are related to unstable, external factors, things that I don't control. Yeah, some stuff that you'll have done on goal setting with Miss Jagger, a task-orientated goal as opposed to an outcome-orientated goal. Think about how those bits of terminology fit in. You'd also think about the task choice, and this links to incentive values from what we talked about last time on, the incentive value, whether or not something's worthwhile doing. How hard is it? If it's really, really easy, who's likely to approach that? If it's really, really hard and we're going to get all the glory, who's likely to approach that? These are all things that you need to be thinking about. And then final points at the bottom, performing well in front of evaluative audiences, and think about our work on evaluation apprehension and how that compares to drive theory, Zion's drive theory in lesson today. Now, attribution retraining is the terminology that you may not have heard yet. You definitely have heard this learned helplessness. We spoke about this today. This belief that failure is inevitable. Alright, you've got no control over events. Now that is not a good situation for us to be. If I'm a coach or a performer, I do not want a player to be experiencing learned helplessness, because that, no control, failure inevitable, basically leads to a lack of effort. There's no point trying. Yeah? So you need to retrain that attribution. We need to get that athlete to think differently. What can we do to make that athlete think differently? And that is effectively what attribution retraining is. So the athlete has little control over ability, luck, or task difficulty, but the athlete has complete control over effort. Effort is internal and unstable and can be changed by the performer. So if we're trying to, avoid learned helplessness, we're trying to avoid learned helplessness at this point, we're going to change the usual external attributions for failure into internal, unstable, controllable factors. So rather than just blaming external factors, because we're trying to avoid learned helplessness here, we're going to blame internal, unstable things that we can control, i.e. effort. Yeah, attributing this lack of success to internal unstable factors will help us to prevent learned helplessness. Now, if we look at it from the other side of things, so we then start to think about not just about bringing it back onto our effort. So we're not necessarily just trying to avoid learned helplessness, okay? But what could we do in terms of not blaming a lack of ability? Yeah, it's not that I wasn't good enough, it's that I chose the wrong tactics, for example, or our strategy was wrong. If I'm a tennis player, it wasn't because I wasn't good enough, it was because my racket didn't work for me today. Rory McIlroy famously choked at the Masters in 2011. We talk about him changing his clubs. It wasn't about him and his ability, it was about a change of his clubs. So there, we're not worried about him adapting learned helplessness at that point. We're trying to avoid him having a lack of self-belief, and that's a real difference. If someone is experiencing emotional differences, i.e. frustration, something like that, how can we control frustration or aggression and change that? You've got to be aware of these things. And primarily around learned helplessness, we're looking to refocus someone, and to avoid learned helplessness, we can highlight previous successes. Look, you've done this before, this is why this is not a problem. Now, the next slide just highlights a couple of key things. You've heard this term from me before, mastery orientation. Remember that the idea that success is inevitable, and being unsuccessful along the way, so missing shots or failing doesn't matter. That's just part of the process of getting better and being successful. Completely different to learned helplessness. A self-serving bias is where you have got a belief that is where your attribution basically means that you attribute things to suit yourself. So we talked today about George missing loads of shots in the basketball experiment and just blaming that on other factors. That's a self-serving bias. It's not because George is not good enough, and it's not because of his ability that he missed the shots. It's because of some other factor. So if you've got a self-serving bias, you basically choose your attribution to suit you. Attribution retraining we've just talked about. Learned helplessness we know about. Now finally, this slide, this is from the exam question that I'm going to show you. Alright, and what I don't want you to do is in an exam ever get spooked because you see a diagram presented to you differently to how it's been in a lesson, because this diagram actually shows the process. So it shows the process rather than attribution model. So this is the process that somebody goes through when they are basically making a decision for subsequent participation. Now I'm not going to explain this to you. What I'm doing is I'm giving you a heads up that this is how the diagram's going to look on Friday, and you need to not be spooked by that. You need to be able to apply your knowledge that we've got to this exam question. Basically, the process. I've taken the question off the bottom, so you don't know what the question necessarily is, but this diagram explains the process. So we've got an outcome from the event, information about that event, a causal attribution. We should know what that is. Yeah, we've talked about the causal element already. Expectancies. Effective response, we should be aware of what that word effective means there, and then our decisions for subsequent participation. I've given you a heads up on this because that's a tricky question. I will see you on Friday. Like I say, I've got an arousal anxiety question for you and this attribution question, and hopefully the stuff that we've been a little bit unsure of, this video will have helped. Your independent study ahead of Friday will have helped, and then the clarification we get on Friday will help. Alright? Excellent. Thank you, Year 13.